Okay,
The Senate feed that we're sending.
this meeting is being recorded for those joining both online and in person. This is the Affordable Housing Committee meeting of Wednesday, February 12th. We're meeting at the Old Town Hall as well as via Zoom. It's now 7 o'clock and we can call the meeting to order. I'll turn things over to the chair.
Welcome everyone.
Welcome your remarks.
We actually have a two-part meeting this evening. And the first part of the meeting will be dedicated to a workshop on housing and homeless issues. We have some distinguished guests that are here for that, so we'll take that item.
Distinguished guests.
Very
Wow.
distinguished guests are here to help us with that part of the meeting. So I think we'll go to that and then we'll defer the rest of the meeting once we finish.
Yeah, would you want to do?
Let's do introductions.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Let's do introductions. We'll go around the room.
Okay.
I'm Herb Kohler with the Affordable Housing Committee.
I'm Gene Schreiner, 30-year homeowner in Fairfield, raised our kids here. And I'm director of commercial lending at the Housing Development Fund based in Stamford, but we focus all over the state. We provide down payment assistance to first-time home buyers. And what I do is help developers who are willing to do construction or permanent financing on a component of affordable housing for multifamily.
Gretchen Gertner, I'm the recording secretary.
I'm Kevin Moore. I'm the Chief Operating Officer with Habitat for Humanity, coastal Fairfield County, located in Stratford. And we're building some affordable housing in town here with the help of you all.
Jackie Page, Affordable Housing Committee.
And Steve Grothwell, Affordable Housing.
And Janice Bulabasis, Affordable Housing.
Bob Ellinger, Affordable Housing Committee.
Mark Barnhart, Director of Community Economic Development. We have some folks joining. I know Emmeline Harrigan, our Assistant Planning Director, Sonia Hine from my office, Gail Felberbaum joining us.
Yes, the Housing Committee.
Housing Committee, and we have another guest. If you want to throw your name in the chat, we'll keep that as a record of your attendance tonight, as we're having a workshop on housing and community housing needs related to our consolidated planning effort. So if you'll bear with me, I'll just provide a very quick overview of the program. Let's see if I can get the thing to working momentarily. Okay. So we've already done that. The purpose really tonight is to identify housing and homeless needs as part of our consolidated planning process. We are a recipient of federal dollars under the Community Development Block Grant Program for the last 50 plus years. It's authorized under Title I, administered by the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. The beauty of the program is it provides relatively flexible funding for communities to address a wide range of housing and community development needs that we identify through a consolidated planning process, which is what we're undergoing now. As I mentioned, we're an entitlement community, which means that we don't have to apply. We receive a grant each year based on the size of our community and needs. So we don't have to go through a competitive grant process to do so. The purpose of the program is to create viable communities in turn by providing housing, suitable living environment, expanded opportunities. There is this emphasis on focused on folks of low to moderate income. You'll see that throughout. HUD requires communities that are participants in the Community Development Block Grant Program to go through a multi-year strategy to identify housing community development goals. During that process, we need to assess needs of our both housing as well as other special needs populations. And that plan really guides the allocation of federal resources over the next 5 years. So it's critical because we all have to relate the activities that we fund back to that 5-year plan. This was a question that Steve asked earlier. It's stayed relatively level. I mean, we've had some up and downs. It's mostly down recently. But this past year, the current year, the total grant is about, I'm missing a zero, but it's $479,000 roughly.
Yeah. But the purchasing power has been
Diminished.
half.
Yeah, so this is the actual grant. We are able to leverage some program income funds. Most of the assistance we provide for first-time home buyers, for example, or rehab programs are in the form of loans that are repaid when the properties are transferred or sold. So we do then have to, we get those monies back and then we're able to put that back into the community in support of our programs. As I mentioned, it's flexible to some degree, but we still need to comply with federal objectives. Needs to meet one of these three national program objectives to benefit persons or areas of low to moderate income, prevent or eliminate slums or blight, which is not a huge issue in a suburban community like Fairfield, and meet an urgent need, which is typically recovery from disaster or things of that nature. So it's pretty limited. Most of our activities fall in, obviously, bucket number one. You might find this surprising. I certainly did. We don't have we don't have areas, census tract areas that are majority low moderate income, over 50%. So we're an exception community. So the federal government will set this based on the lowest quartile, which in this case, concentration of low moderate income persons is anything greater than 22.2%. And these are the eligible block groups that meet or exceed that threshold within Fairfield. So it's interesting. It has shifted and changed over the years. What hasn't typically is the area on the eastern side of town. Those are not surprising. I found a little surprising to see areas of Greenfield Hill and the beach area, but that's what the numbers show.
I'm sorry, Mike, but where do those numbers come from? How can Greenfield Hill qualify as low and
They
moderate?
come from the US Census, and HUD interprets that data and sets the criteria for it. So I didn't make these numbers up. That's what they show.
Sounds crazy to me, but all right.
I agree.
So are these, I wonder if these are refined somewhat, Mark, because when it says 601.2.
Yeah, they're block groups.
It's a
within
piece,
census
it's a
tracts.
piece of a census
Correct.
tract, so it can be a very, very small area, actually. Maybe even like a block.
Pretty
like
big.
a block.
Like,
I mean, I lived right in the center of that, and there weren't
Yeah.
eligible people up there that I remember.
I don't think that's, I don't think it's probably the entire 601. I think it's probably a portion of 601.
So the good news is that most of our programs and activities are focused on persons of low to moderate income, not area benefit. But when we do community projects, which you'll see, like streets and sidewalks, that typically meets the area benefit criteria. So housing related activities, we've used community development block grant funds for ownership assistance. As you mentioned, we have a program here as well. Done it for site acquisition in some cases. So they use the housing trust fund for that purpose. Clearance and demolition work, actually doing that right now for 254 Greenfield Street. Housing rehab and other housing services, like permanent supportive housing services provided by Operation Hope, for example. I just cannot get this thing to. There. So community development includes, these are other categories just in terms of we can fund recreational facilities, streets and sidewalk improvements, eliminate barriers to accessibility for public facilities and buildings. Mentioned some of these before in terms of renovations to buildings. We also have a small business assistance program funded through grant. Again, has to provide employment opportunities, or the person owning the business has to be a person of low to moderate income. And then public services funds a lot of nonprofit groups here that provide a range of services to meet our community needs, again, identified through this 5-year consolidated planning process. Public service dollars are capped at 15% of the overall grant, so it's pretty competitive. So tonight, what we're here to do is look at housing and housing related issues. So these are questions I'd like the group to perhaps think about. What are the most common types of housing problems for Fairfield? Are there groups that are more effective than others? Are there particular needs, different types of housing that are needed here in the community that aren't being met? And what other needs are underserved? So those are some thoughts. I know we have some folks representing some housing providers and CDCs in the room. We have some other folks joining online. Hi, Marlene. So at this point, I'm just going to open it up for any observations or questions, but wanted to provide kind of a backdrop as to the purpose of tonight. And just to give you a sense as to the timeline, I'll come back to that slide. But we're just beginning this process. It's a little bit more robust than our usual annual plan development. So we'll do some topical workshops, this being one related to housing needs. We are asking for folks seeking funding. These are nonprofit organizations, other providers. Those applications are due on the 17th. Individuals looking for money, but organizations that provide services to the community. We go through a couple public hearings and then the approvals locally, and then submission to HUD by August. So that's kind of the time frame. So I'll open it up now for any.
I can make some
Comments.
comments because I'm new to the
Sure.
committee. And from what I see with developers with different parts of the state, one, as we all know, is finding land. There's not, even upstate, it's hard, it's a challenge everywhere. And then the cost. So that's where we come in, we can provide higher loan to cost for a lot of these developers, and they don't realize, many of them don't realize that if you have a Section 8 tenant, you'll get market rent. And the likelihood, if you build and have a percentage of affordable, the likelihood of vacancy is extremely low. So if somebody leaves, you could easily replace them, where if it's high end, those are harder to replace. As we know, inventory is low everywhere. So that's the challenges we see with developers. Building costs, materials, supply chain is a challenge for the developer for either single family or multifamily. A lot of them are getting into multifamily. And another challenge is we see these big high rises going up in every city, the large cities, and we're trying not to do that. We're trying to do 2-family houses, maybe 3-family houses. We're low profile. It doesn't affect the
character.
the
look of the town at all. But you see these in Stanford.
It's a huge challenge.
It's just ridiculous.
Especially,
the way
the cost of land, as you described, if you're trying to, and we've witnessed that ourselves, with some of the projects we've done with Habitat.
But you can, if you do it right, you can make it work with grants, like with the down payment assistance. We participate with other down payment assistance sources. So there'll be more than maybe 2 or 3 mortgages sometimes, but they get grants and we'll provide a low interest loan. But for the developer, a lot of times it's them not understanding that it works. The cash flow works, and they think, oh, it's not going to be as the value, and it isn't. It's not. The property is not going to be valued the same way as a market rate would, but the cash flow does work. And what some of the guys who are doing it find is that the risk is not as high because
Pretty much a guaranteed
Yeah.
income.
and then we're coming in at very competitive rates and higher loan to costs, but we're doing it in a way where we're thinking through it. We borrow money from 10 consortium banks, they're local community banks. M&T is the lead. Fairfield County, First County, Bankwell, it's all familiar names. They're participating with us on all these projects. So it's not just us, it's the community as a whole. So we're just trying to fight the fight.
Well, Well, we've done a project together.
Yeah.
We have used community development block grant funds to help with the acquisition of two-family we did.
It's gonna be a two-family,
Single family to conversion to two-family.
which is common. They buy a single family or make it into a 2 or 3 family, and then you have affordable components with it. And
And our friend tries to maximize the bedroom count, so. It works, as you said, the cash flow is very good if you've got Section 8 tenants in there, so. Thank you, Gene. I'll go around the room. Anyone else that would like to share?
So people are living longer and a lot of them are outliving their savings. And seniors who might need a furnace or some roof repairs or windows, how do they know that they could come to you, Mark? You know, how do they know that there's services available from the town?
Well, we try to get the word out as best we can, because we do have a very successful rehab program. We help with homeowner improvements, minor repairs through our handyman program, which provides up to 8 hours of labor at our expense to do minor repairs around the house. That's a yearly cap, and then and can be reset next year. And then we have our rehab program that covers more expansive projects like roof replacements, furnace replacements, and the like. It's always a challenge. We do. Sonia does presentations down at the Bigelow Center. We have information on our website. We publish information, issue press releases, put it online through digital and traditional media sources. It's in newsletters. But if you're not actively in the market looking to do that type of thing, you could easily miss that. So it's really a timing issue. So we constantly have to remind ourselves to keep that information out there and keep sending it out, because oftentimes, unless you need that roof done, you may not remember that. But we do have a good referral network. So people do find their way to our doorstep. I will say that, in the past, there has been some reluctance on folks, especially seniors that have paid off their mortgage. We provide assistance in the form of a loan, so that it is secured through a lien on the property. It's a no interest loan, so it's no interest, zero interest. And it just sits there until you're ready to go sell the property. And then at that point, you or your heirs will need to pay us back. And then we use that money to help somebody else in the community. But occasionally that creates a conversation. Folks are somewhat reluctant to do that. But we're finding that less and less an impediment. So that's the good news.
No interest and no monthly payments?
No monthly payments. And it's essentially an indefinite term loan that sits there until you go sell the
Would
property.
the interest accrue on it?
Does not. There's no interest.
That's a pretty good deal.
It is a great deal. It is a great deal.
Does
So,
all that money get spent? Like,
yep. So
you're
the
doing.
way the federal government works is we have to use, we're on a reimbursement basis. We have to put the money out first and then request reimbursement from Washington. We have to spend our money first. That is, any program income we receive through repayments of these loans has to be reprogrammed, deployed in the community before we ask reimbursement from the feds. But we typically do our best to spend as much of Uncle Sam's dollars as we can.
This is only for seniors?
No, it could be any income eligible person. It just happens to be that a lot of seniors are the ones that they may be house rich and cash poor.
Right.
They don't have the resources necessarily to replace a roof at $30,000. So we're able to step in and help them do that. So thank you. That's certainly one of the things that we're looking to continue to do through the community development block.
so what is the income threshold?
It varies, but it's based on 80% AMI. So it's based on the number of people in the household at or below 80%.
Is it statewide or just?
Area.
Area? Fairfield's pretty high,
It's based on the Bridgeport area, so
It is.
it's not as high as.
which
you
is
know,
still
Lower
over
County.
100,000.
It's probably,
100% is
yeah,
above. So
yeah,
probably
100%.
90 is, say roughly 90 is the 80% level.
Okay.
But that's for a family of four.
Family of
Family
four.
four, right?
Yeah.
Scales down for.
So somebody retired who's on social security but has a lot of money in the bank. They're just looking,
It's not an asset test.
So
unless
you're
they're
not-
using- Unless they're using it for income.
okay,
purposes. We have to look at your income stream, but we don't consider your assets. It's not like
right,
Section 8 program.
gotcha.
So, yeah. Other comments? I'll pick on Kevin down there.
Do you, Mark, a question for you. Do you expend all the CDBG funds you're awarded each year?
We try to, but we always have, because of the way it's deployed and the program income is unpredictable. We have some years where we'll end up with $50,000 or $60,000 in loan repayments, and we've budgeted, half of that. Sounds like a good problem to have, and it is, but some projects we've found in the past when we deploy it, it's not so much the home ownership and rehab tends to be somewhat cyclical, depending on economic conditions more generally, especially home ownership, depending on interest rates, for example. And capital projects, because we don't impose a lot of hoops, but it is a process. We do have to do an environmental review to comply with the federal government requirements. That takes some time. And then we find oftentimes, we have folks that maybe aren't ready to spend the money as quickly as they thought they were. So we do spend most of the money, but we have money we can move money around if there's an urgent need that comes up. And we do. So we've been able to, some of the rehab programs we've been doing, like project that I was referencing earlier with Housing Development Fund. We used community development block grant dollars to assist in the acquisition of the property. Single to multifamily. We've done that for multifamily. We have not had to turn to the Housing Trust Fund to cover a gap beyond that. We've been able to use the Housing Trust Fund for other, mainly for land acquisition to date, but we could. And, now we're looking at some gap financing for a project involving the Housing Authority on 980 High Street, where they're going to have a gap in between money that they're raising through low-income housing tax credits and money that they get from the Department of Housing. Otherwise, there's still a gap that we need to fill for that. So. From your perspective, home ownership is obviously a tough thing to do in this part of the world.
Yeah, absolutely.
Getting harder.
Right. And as you identify that the two big expenses being land and the construction, right? In the case of your projects with Habitat, you've solved the land issue for us, but with the land leases arrangement, but we're still selling homes for less than it costs us to build them with 30-year interest-free mortgages, right? So, what really limits our ability to scale up will be just a question of how much funds we can raise to subsidize the units up front for the home buyers to keep them affordable. We're servicing 40 to 70% of AMI, so it's definitely on the lower end for home ownership.
It's impressive. Before working with you guys, I didn't think 60% AMI home ownership units would be even feasible. So, but the combination of the model that Habitat uses and plus the internal financing of the 30-year fixed rate, no interest mortgage. I mean, these are all powerful instruments, and then you throw on the land for free, essentially, that makes it work. So it's really, we're really pleased to be working with you, looking forward to the first units being completed, and we've got others in the pipeline. So gonna keep you busy for hopefully a few years.
You're counting on it.
How does the appreciation work, you know, for if they sell the house down the road?
Yeah, there's as a function of the land lease, you could probably speak to this better than me, Mark, but there's a calculation in the land lease where they share some of the appreciated value. Yeah, it's a calculation based.
There's no perfect system, but we put a cap on it. And there's ultimately a cap because you're selling to another income eligible household. So they need to be
Have
able
to,
to
right?
afford it, yes.
Well, yeah, what it's doing though is it's putting people in a home that would not be able to get in a home. So it's a start. So when they leave, then they could buy something that would appreciate, but it gives them the opportunity to own something.
And they are getting some appreciation. It's the old fashioned way. When you buy a house and you pay it down, that's the equity you have in the property. It's not so much the upside appreciation of real estate values that everyone's come to know and love, but
Well, there's a little bit of that.
there's a little bit of that.
Calculation
So
also.
again, we have to try to keep it affordable. The idea is not buy low, sell high. That'd be great. We have to be able to preserve these units in perpetuity essentially for other folks. But I think you find a pretty stable group too.
Yeah, there's
A lot of turnover.
very little resale. I mean, typically for our buyers, their mortgage is less than they were paying for rent, right? So there's very little incentive to move on. You know, unless you're far enough into the process that you're downsizing or relocating, that's really the only units we see turnover generally.
So what are you selling the units for? Ones on Greenfield?
It's we sell them for not to exceed 30% of their monthly income. So it varies based on the home buyer's income. Yeah, we really sell them for not more than the appraised value or not more than 30% of their monthly income, but it's always going to be that 30% of their monthly income that sets the sales price.
That really helps people really at the lower level.
Yeah, I mean, that's how it's affordable for that kind of low end of the AMI range, right? Is
So how do you find them or how do they find you?
yeah, so we have like a rolling admissions process. So we do info sessions out in the community. Prospective applicants can attend, learn about the requirements of the program, and then apply. We did one in Fairfield last year. October. There's over 100 attendees that generated like 12 accepted home buyers into the program, which is pretty typical. You know, there's always going to be a certain amount of them that either overqualify, underqualify, or some just self-select out, you know, based on the requirements of the program. They do have to do partnership equity, so they have to help build the homes. Yeah.
So you already have the homeowners for the Greenfield?
Yeah, there's 4 home buyers for
We
Greenfield.
work on the
awesome.
sweat equity piece.
That's awesome.
Yeah, they're, I think all but one completed their sweat equity, so. Yeah, there's a handful of Fairfield, so we're requiring that that they live or work in Fairfield currently to buy a home in Fairfield. So there's a handful that qualify for what we hope will be the next round of purchases. But yeah, the need is never the issue, right? We can always find qualified home buyers.
And you require families? How do you do it in terms of?
It's not necessarily, we can't discriminate, so, but we do, we're building 3 and 4 bedroom units, so we're try to end up with families in essence, right? I mean, they have to income qualify. And, you know, generally it's easier to do that with more people in the family, right? Like it's actually, we have a couple 1-bedroom condos in Bridgeport that we struggle to get folks qualified for it, just because, you know, the income is pretty low then.
Other folks in the room that want to say a few words, I'll turn to, if not, I'll turn to.
We mentioned sometimes some of the grant money doesn't get spent, right? We have some left over, but
Yeah.
is the converse also true that demand exceeds the amount we have?
So we have tremendous demand for the public service dollars, nonprofit organizations looking to provide so-called public services to meet needs within the community, but they're limited to 15% of the overall grant. So with a diminished pool of money, that money gets, we're always oversubscribed. The other side, we don't like to do a lot of capital projects, partly because when we do capital projects, the timeline can take a while. So sometimes it's a longer period than we'd like to have our money committed for. But in addition to that, the amount of money that we can put into a project is relatively modest. And then you have to comply with other requirements such as Davis-Bacon prevailing wage, which can increase your overall construction cost somewhat. If you're not accustomed to that. Some people, it's not an issue because they're already using union labor, but other folks, that's a deal breaker for them. So we want people to be very conscious of that, and because once we put $1 of federal community development block grant into your project, the entire project becomes subject to Davis-Bacon and other federal requirements. So
You said Davis-Bacon?
Davis-Bacon.
Yeah.
Mark, I had one thing I wanted to mention. The age-friendly Fairfield project, which is been co-led by the Social Services Department, Human and Social Services Department at Fairfield and Fairfield Senior Advocates, is having listening sessions next week, Thursday the 20th at the Bigelow Center. And then they'll be held at the libraries, both the main library and also Fairfield Woods Library in March. Those dates are March 13th and March 19th. And in addition, there's one session next week that's focused on realtors. Recruiting a bunch of realtors to come and talk about what they're seeing in terms of housing needs. And we're looking at the entire range. So anybody who's buying a first home, to someone who's aging in place or looking to downsize. I mean, everybody's issue is important to us. So we're recruiting people to participate in these sessions. They'll be advertised actually through the library, and people can sign up for them through the library. And then we're pushing the ones at the Bigelow Center. We've already got the realtors for one. But we're hoping to provide, body of information that'll support, validate the direction that the housing domain of the age-friendly Fairfield project has undertaken. And Gail Feldbaum is one of my partners in this effort. We got certain information from the survey that we did. We got 1,000 full respondents to a 42-question survey that was done in 2023. But this is to dig deeper, to really make sure that we've got community representation to the extent we possibly can. So any information we get from that, we're going to funnel back to you, and I'll send an announcement of this of these sessions to everyone who's here tonight, just so you're mindful of it.
Emmeline has a question. Emmeline, go ahead.
I would, Herb, I don't remember if we talked about this, but when you do your outreach, are you asking also specific leading questions like would Fairfielders like more access to more condominiums in town? And I ask this because we, as the Plan and Zoning Commission is looking at revising its regulations. And some of these are applicant led, and some of these may require additional follow-up with the commission when we get to some of the zoning regulation changes, post adoption of the POCD. So, just understanding specifics from folks is helpful to us to really kind of navigating, some of the potential changes that, anecdotally I hear in the office from folks who call and, are asking, kind of supply questions without really specifying, but, they're looking for places for widowed parents to come live in town, for their young kids to come back. So, we get that information just through the questions that we ask, but it'd be great to know in the groups that you're meeting with as well, that this is a consistent message of need in the community.
We're going to probe as much as we can, Emmeline, in terms of understanding the specific objectives of folks that come. And we'll ask them for their perspectives when the community, their friends and people they run into as well. But we'll try to get as much detail to that end as we can.
Thank you.
And Emmeline and Mark have been great. They both met with the Housing Domain Group and given perspectives on the landscape. And so and I think and back to Steve's point previously, the hope is that this group, one of the things that this group will serve on a continuing basis is to become additional housing advocates and also to publicize the types of programs that Mark is working, and hopefully new and additional programs that we can develop as well, and certainly yours, Gene, as well.
Anyone else online, Gail or Marlene? You have any thoughts you'd like to share? Or anyone else in the room?
Yeah, a comment. I happened to drive through New Rochelle. There was an article in the New York Times a few years ago about what they've done downtown, and I heard a comment about high rises. They interestingly built a lot of not so very high rises. Let me say 4 stories, 5 stories, and right next to the train station. And it has essentially transformed the downtown, both in terms of people living there, people being able to work without having to drive. So you could walk the train station, catch a train or to Stamford, wherever. And maybe I think it'd be a good idea to look at something a similar pattern.
Yeah.
Be open to a similar pattern of development in Fairfield.
Certainly, that's an approach that the state has emphasized, as has Fairfield, in terms of our existing POD overlay zone, which is around the new Fairfield Black Rock train station. To a lesser extent, we looked at the downtown. It's mostly redevelopment and limited infill opportunities downtown.
Yeah.
And when you talk about high rise in Fairfield, that's exactly what you're talking about, which is a 4 or 5 story building typically. But it doesn't work. It works around transit nodes or in commercial corridors. But what we want to do is make sure that we're preserving other aspects, other areas of town, neighborhoods from development of that sort, because it really seems out of place, and that's where we tend to get most of the pushback publicly, which you can understand. And so we found it challenging to try to create the so-called missing middle housing, those lower density developments, because of, you're not spreading, you have similar land acquisition development costs, but you're spreading it among fewer units. So it becomes a challenge. But, we've been able to find opportunities to do that here and there. And hopefully that will continue.
So I had a borrower from our previous banking relationship that he bought a property that was for sale forever. It was gutted, commercial building, 2 stories above the parking, and he killed it because he got it cheap. The problem now is nothing's cheap.
Right.
So when he bought it, nobody wanted it. Now, a lot of people bought those up. And like Mark said, if you're only putting 10 or 20 units or less than that, the reason they're looking at these 200 unit apartment buildings is that's the only way they can make a lot of money. Where the cost to build for these smaller places in Stamford, like on Summer Street, I talk to developers all the time. Why don't you just buy this and put in 20 apartments above the garage, because they don't have to put parking in, and that's a big challenge as well. And they say because it costs $2.5 or $3 million to buy, and then you have to gut it and build it. So that's
my return is like 5%. I could put
so if they
CD in to get 5%. So I'm not gonna risk all my money for a limited return on my investment.
Story building, they're gonna make more money, but that's the problem. with the challenge of all of them. So that's where like we might come in and say, well, we'll give a low rate and then a high loan to cost. But you know, the math has to work at the back end with rental income. So if 50% of the units are at affordable rates and the other are market, it still has to cash flow to pay the loan back. So the problem is the cost to buy it. And then the cost to build is still high, which some of them do it better than others, but there's a group out there that they're shying away from doing that.
Is manufactured housing proven to be noticeably cheaper to put in place? Because you get very high quality
Yeah.
manufactured housing.
Yeah, there are a lot of them are doing that now. And actually our chairman, he said about 2 weeks ago, he said that they're trying to put a facility in Connecticut, which was part of the cost.
It's
for them
transport.
is transport. So if they had it in Connecticut and they were building them in Connecticut, it'll work a lot better. But you're right.
You guys do a little bit of modular construction, you build it in a shop and bring it to the site, so.
Yeah, we panelize. Yeah, I mean, I've looked at modular and it's not cost competitive with our model. Of course, our model is not market rate, right? Because it's partially volunteer supplied. But yeah, they 2 to 3 times the cost of what we can produce units at. But a lot of that is because they're getting built in Pennsylvania primarily and shipped here. But Gail has a question there.
Yes, I just wanted to mention, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I just wanted to mention that to questions like how would people know to use the, call Mark Barnhart's office or something if they have a problem. The Housing Committee is hoping to create a reference center in town
Mhm.
for housing related issues. So then we would have booklets and we'll have information for people. And that would be a town-wide, I don't know what we're gonna call it, Herb, but a center.
Yeah, it's a reference center, resource center.
Yeah,
And it can be physical as well as virtual, so. Yeah,
Well, any help to help us get the word out is much appreciated. You can put all the information out, but again, if you're not looking for it at that particular time, you oftentimes miss it, so.
yeah, right.
thanks, Gail.
Good observation, thank you. Anyone else would like to share, and then we can move on to our other part of our meeting?
I guess the other challenge, aside from, in addition to the high cost of land, is the fact that there may be land that is less costly, but there's no infrastructure, no public water or sewer. And so that's a huge chunk of town. So all the density occurs.
And the developers are telling me now, and one in Westport, one in Hartford, and one in Torrington, all 3 of them told me that the process to get sewer infrastructure in is a lot more cumbersome now.
Really?
Yeah. When all those 3 towns, and these are developers who've been in business for 40 years.
Why is that?
I don't know.
You would think with technology that there would be a way.
It's not getting easier, put it that way.
Not getting easier.
And I'm hearing
It's a huge
this,
challenge.
hearing this from the developers. So you're asking about infrastructure, that's a challenge as well.
Well, sometimes there's a reason why the infrastructure is where it is, because you do these things often through special assessments that are passed on to the people who hook up, like utilities typically do that, pass on the cost. And if you're extending a line, you only have 3 households that's being served, the cost to extend that line on a per household basis is pretty high. If you're in a more densely packed area, you're splitting that cost over 100 households, becomes a lot easier.
It could be a capacity issue too.
It is also can be a capacity issue. In Fairfield, one of the issues is that we have a lot older system in some parts of town. Pipes leak. They allow gray water and water that doesn't need to be treated at the plant into the system. So 50% of the flow needs trunk sewer, for example, is what's known as inflow and infiltration, which then reduces the capacity of the plant to deal with the stuff that should be dealing with. So part of the challenge and what the town's looking to do, particularly on the eastern side of town, is replace some major sewer lines to hopefully eliminate that problem or reduce it significantly, which then will, avoid having to expand the plant, which is extremely costly.
But you could increase capacity then, perhaps?
Would also increase capacity to not only meet current demand, but also future demand as well.
And it also the utilities, the developers are putting in these multifamily buildings, they're putting in heat pumps now. So it's all electric and it's very efficient. Whereas the old electric was not efficient, the new electric is efficient.
You guys doing that too?
Yeah, fully electric heat pumps.
Okay, well, anyone else want to have any closing thoughts on the housing homeless workshop? Otherwise, we can move on. Everyone's free to stay if you'd like. Be sure, if you didn't already do so, to sign in on the sign-up sheet that went around, so I have a record and can share that with the good folks, letting them know we did appropriate outreach for this effort, so appreciate that.
One more question. Operation Hope isn't here tonight, but we don't have a homeless shelter in town any longer, right?
Correct. We do not, Operation Hope does not provide transitory emergency housing in town. They no longer have a shelter. They do provide 22 units of permanent supportive housing in town, which is the model today, which is to do a triage, to assess people's needs and to put them as quickly as possible in the permanent housing with wraparound services to support them living there. So it's not shuttling from an emergency shelter situation to another shelter situation, which is supposed to be time limited anyway, trying to move them into a permanent housing situation. But there still is the need out there for people in extreme duress to find emergency shelter. So we do have to access other shelters.
I'm gonna leave some business cards in case.
Thanks, Gene. We hope to find you some more business. Appreciate everyone joining. We're gonna go on to the other portion of our agenda.
Have you guys done business in town?
Yeah.
Yep, we've done
Looking for more.
one project, hoping to do more.
Thank you. Pleasure meeting you.
So, since we have Kevin here, I don't know if we can, well, do you want to approve the minutes first?
Yeah, why don't we start?
And then,
I move to approve.
Second.
All in favor, approved.
yay.
So then we're actually moving to our regular old business list of items. Does everyone, Kevin, you have an agenda? Tom, you have an agenda?
No, I do. Q.
Tom's been here before, so he knows the list probably.
Yes, I do.
But, I will say, did mention to Kevin, we're partway through, this is under 5C, Parkview Commons redevelopment. So we are partway through the approvals needed to ground lease 385 and 409 Quincy, which are two vacant single-family homes within the Parkview Commons development we acquired back in, I think, 2021, late 2021, with the intention of redeveloping these properties. As you recall, post-storm, superstorm Sandy, these were never at the correct flood elevation even before Sandy, but Sandy kind of exacerbated the situation. And so, we were concerned that over time, rising flood insurance premiums and the risks posed by climate change could make preserving these affordable units difficult. And so we've embarked on a campaign as properties become available to repurchase them. The town has a limited right to repurchase properties. And then redevelop the properties and hopefully add, not only preserve existing units rebuild them at the correct flood elevation, but also add additional units as well. So we have entered into a development agreement with Habitat for 5 properties within the Parkview Commons development. These 2 units are kind of the leading edge because they're not next to one another, and they're, at least in terms of lot size, they are conforming duplex building lots. They have more than 9,000 square feet of Residence B zone. I'm not sure they meet all the other requirements, but we may need a few variances along the way in terms of lot square and street frontage and setbacks and all that, but we'll work through that. Largely within a Residence B zone, if you meet the requirements, these are kind of built as of right, like we did on Greenfield Street. May need some variances through ZBA to do that. But then once they're approved, typically you just put in a building application. It's reviewed for compliance with zoning and building codes and fire codes, and then the permit's issued and build construction. It's a little different here because we're in a flood zone. So we do need to file with the Planning and Zoning Commission a coastal site plan application, which was done in-house when we did the Parkview Commons development a long time ago. So I think we can probably, save ourselves a little bit of time going through and resurrecting that work, but we're certainly moving ahead with the ground lease for those 2 units. We've gone through Board of Selectmen and Planning and Zoning last night. The RTM is the last stop. At the end of this month, beginning next week is the committee meetings, and then the 24th is final approval. And that will allow, once we finish up Greenfield Street, hopefully May, June sometime, be able to pivot to Quincy Street, start those. And in the meantime, 254, we have closed on that property as of January. We are planning to demo the unit using Community Development Block Grant funds. So we are doing a pre-demo survey. We do expect, based on the age of the structure, to have some minor issues relative to lead paint and asbestos and things of that nature, not atypical for that type age of unit. But we will be able to deal with that during demo. So we'll hopefully give you a nice clean site. We've already disconnected utilities. This is a little bit funkier because we don't quite have required lot to do 2 duplexes, but again, in conversations with Planning and Zoning, we think that it's worth having the conversation and hopefully doing 2 duplexes instead of a duplex in a single family. So that's the plan. And then we might go back to Parkview Commons for the other three properties there.
Would they be duplexes too?
We're actually hoping that we might be able to do a combination of duplexes and triplexes there. But again, that might be pushing, we're hopeful that as we, continue this process, it'll become a little easier. That most of the stuff, when we do duplexes in a Residence B zone, as I mentioned, it's kind of as of right. You may need some variances. When you do something a little bit more complex, you may have to go through a site plan, public hearing, special exception type thing. So that involves lawyers and all that, and hope not to spend your hard-earned money on that as much. So that's the plan. You have anything from your end? I mean, things going well, it seems.
Yeah, we're progressing nicely. Appreciate all your efforts. Mark's been a driving force of all of it, so tip of the hat.
Well, we're happy to keep you busy. Anything else on Greenfield or Parkview?
You got it.
Habitat? Yep. With respect to the moratorium application, the public hearing, the public notice period has closed at the state. There was a public notice of our intent to file And then when the state received it and certifies that it's complete, they have to then provide the opportunity for the public to comment on the application. Which has since been completed. There were a couple comments made. It really had more to do with New Canaan than ours, but I think we got wrapped into New Canaan's application, which is, I guess, somewhat controversial. So we're still expecting a decision on or before the end of March. Until that time, we have a whole host of applications pending before planning and zoning, which is now meeting every week.
Daily?
And last night, they referred a whole slew of new applications to a public hearing. So you would be hearing more about them, including Bureau Street, Miss Drive, Upper Black Rock Turnpike, Congress Street.
Euro, is that the
St. Emery's.
St. Emery's?
Yeah. That'd be like 100 unit development.
So that's a private development at 833, not.
Yep.
So Mark, the one on Black Rock, 6 stories. And so do we have firefighting equipment that can go up 6 stories?
Well, the fire department has reviewed it for access and provides comments on it. My understanding is that's not an issue. But, you know, they want to make sure that they are able to fight a fire from every point around the building.
So my drive by the site, as I recall, there was like a hill. They're not gonna
Yeah,
build
there's-
on top of the hill, are
Essentially,
they?
they're building into the hill.
Yeah,
A lot of earth moving.
okay. And we can't stop, it could be 10 stories or 12 stories, it doesn't matter, right?
Well-
They can do what they want.
There's a limit to some degree, but it's 6 stories from the one side because of the way the terrain is sloped. But typically they're within that, 4 to 6 story window.
Where is this located?
4480 Black Rock Turnpike.
Further up.
It's across from Greenfield Hunt. On the other side of the street.
Well, it's 2 buildings, so.
It is 2 buildings.
Yeah.
So it would not be, again, to our earlier point, probably the location that we would select for this type of housing. But that's 830G.
They're on a sewer system, right? Because Greenfield Hunt is on sewer.
They're on sewer.
Mark, is that 96 units? Is that the one that's 96? units?
Yes,
And then the Bureau Street, Biro Street,
it's about 100.
is about 100 units. They're both 830Gs. And then the one on Congress Street is smaller.
Smaller.
I think there's one on Kings Drive, too, it's 10 units.
That's 10 units.
Yeah, that's not an 830G, that's.
No, it is, yeah.
Well, 1 or 2 of the ones last night,
But Congress, they didn't say.
not. 1 or 2 of the ones that came up.
Kings Drive is near where Lacey Place is, that area of Post Road.
Scandinavian, not this, is it
Yeah.
Scandinavian?
Yeah, Scandinavian.
Uh,
Ukrainian
Southward.
Club.
The
Ukrainian Club.
Ukrainian. Kings Highway West.
Blackstone, somewhere
Yeah.
around there.
Yeah, down the road.
People use that as a cut through to get to
The Bronson.
Bronson.
I didn't know that.
Oh, yeah. Now, you can't tell anyone that.
And
On the positive front, last night, the Planning and Zoning Commission did approve the offsite BMR unit text amendment. Very minimal changes. So now they can allow or at their discretion,
They love that.
allow for offsite BMR
The
units.
new
to
drinking,
satisfy-
whatever one of them said.
That 25, that was laced with at your discretion.
We've only restated about 5 times.
I think if Bob or I or Mark were editing that document, it would be about a third length of
Third
it.
the size, yes. But they pretty much left it alone.
They left it alone, they liked it.
Mark, what's the address of the development on Congress?
I have the,
It's 4480 or something.
1477 Congress Street.
Yeah.
Did you say Mira was
It's down
100?
off the, Merritt, it's down off the Merritt.
BIRR.
Mira.
Right down there.
Yeah.
St. Emery's,
Area is so congested already.
I mean, it's not a big plot.
Yeah.
The only Zero Street, which makes it somewhat, is it goes up. And so there's quite a grade change, but 100 units is really pushing the envelope for sure. But, again, the church, I think asked for and received 2.5 or $2.6 million for the property. So again, when you, Carol, I think had, I think the upper limit of what she could go was $1.5 million. And she was proposing something in the order of like 30 units. So, that's your difference right there.
Congress Street has septic.
Yeah, I'm not really,
I don't know what they want to do with that.
there's a lot of,
Almost 2 acres.
like people throwing stuff in against the wall here.
Yeah.
I don't know that they're all well thought out, but
There's
there's a rush to,
There's water in the back.
water, it's floods, it's flood.
it's not great.
Yeah, it's
I'll
definitely.
just summarize it that way. The Housing Trust Fund, essentially, we're about the same, about $1 million. We did, and you'll recall that we did provide Carol with a soft commitment letter of roughly $500,000 to support her proposed development, the gap in financing. I do expect her to come back and ask that to be a hard commitment, so we'll need to take that into account. But to Steve's concern that we have a huge pot of money and we don't have plans to spend it, I guess we can allay the RTM's concerns that $1 million really doesn't get you very far
Sure
these
doesn't.
days, but
sure doesn't.
we have plans to spend it. And then the P O C D is now a standing item on all planning and zoning commission agendas. They're making slow progress, but I do think, to Emmeline's point earlier, it really sets the community back by not taking a more proactive stance and telling folks within the development community exactly what it is you want.
Sends.
Because then you're constantly reacting to whatever is the latest application and letting them dictate the terms of what development should occur and where it should occur and how much of it should occur. So I think we really do need to wrap this up.
It's very disappointing, and very, very disappointing. And the chairman, to his credit, is trying to move this along, but there are differences of opinion in terms of what we want to see in the future landscape in town, and it's being used to really slow this process down. And it's unfortunate, but it's real.
Yeah. Well, there was a
filibuster
ongoing last night too. So
The chairman, to his credit, was pretty direct with the commission in terms of doing your homework in advance, and let's not bring questions fresh to the staff at the meeting. Let's get that homework done in advance and
ask staff those questions
and
before or after the meeting.
absolutely Bailey.
I would think with Jim retiring, that would have an impact on the POCD too. No, I mean, there'll be a vacancy.
Yeah, it's
Right, so.
it's gonna be a
The timing's not that,
the timing's
from that perspective, not
interesting,
that great.
yeah, for sure.
well, so the other thing I wanted to share with you is Herb and I have to make a command appearance next week with the Planning and Zoning Commission. So I can share with you.
Oh.
Let's see. Hey, push that.
And what are you guys doing at
No,
PNC?
you mean RTM? RTM.
So we talked about, we did submit a written report using the format that we've used for years, and we thought maybe it would be helpful to, we have some story to tell. Maybe we could include a more PowerPoint presentation of some sort to complement the written report. So this is kind of what I put together, and we can edit it. But first I wanted to share with the RTM what our mission is and our specific roles and responsibilities as outlined in the town code. Among those, make an annual report to the RTM, and a little bit of history of where we've been. This group had its inception back in 1985 as a special task force that was put together by the first select woman at the time. That developed or led to the town's first affordable housing plan, which was very prescient, kind of a call to action to address rising housing costs at that time, which were pronounced even then, and of concern. And then we created a permanent committee and updated our plans both in 2014 and 2022. 2014.
Mark, the task force was done under Jackie Durrell.
Durrell.
But was it her initiative or did the RTM start the?
Her initiative. I mean, I wasn't here at the time, but that was my understanding.
Okay.
So we, 2014, we had a number of action steps coming out of that plan, which we were able to implement. Inclusionary zoning, created a model affordability plan that's in use today, established a housing trust fund and a mechanism by which to fund it through the inclusionary zoning committee. And we did finally update our ADU regulations while they were permitted. This provides a lot more flexibility. Still, a problem persists, and this I just went back to 2000, but if you went back further, it's even more pronounced. But you can see, a little bit of after the 2008 financial crisis, prices came down a little bit, but then they've gone back up again. And certainly in recent years, we've seen an explosion in terms of median housing costs relative to median family income. This is another way to express it. If you look at housing cost burden, obviously cost burden is more pronounced with renters than it is owners, but we're not out of step with a lot of the rest of the region or state as a whole. It's a problem that the state suffers with, period. We have seen an increase in housing production. Our average 10 years or 11 years prior was just under 100 units per year. Now we're about 150, so increase, not overly concerning, but you can see some bigger projects.
If you look at it a different way, like there was 92 units, are 85 of them single family?
Oh, yeah. Here it is.
Okay.
So we are producing different types of housing. So, the 10 years, 2003 to 13, it was primarily 81% single family. Now it's 52% multifamily, 5 or more units. But according to the latest census data, 85% of our housing stock is still one family, of which, a predominant housing typology is single family detached, which is, more than 3/4, 80% of our housing.
And we have seen a shift in the size of households as well, though. I mean, we have a very large number of
Small
two-person households and single-person households.
Our housing or our household size dipped a little bit, but it's going back up a little bit. It's still under 3, but that's, average household size. So you still have a lot of, your nuclear family is not the, again, predominant type anymore. So got a lot of folks that are living in unorthodox situations. We have increased our affordable housing inventory, as you can see from the numbers here. What's different for us compared to a lot of other communities is that the number of government assisted units as a share or percentage of our total inventory is smaller than most communities. We do the hard work, which is creating units that are deed restricted, which is not easy to do. I included this slide because I always find this interesting for the Board of Finance. These are, these multifamily developments are commercial assets, and they do provide a fairly nice, if you're looking at land as a limited resource, on a per acre basis, the tax yield is pretty significant. And per unit, and they don't produce a lot of school-age children. That's a fraction of what it is for a single family home. Our friends at Habitat, I'm sure they've made progress since then, but that's the timeline. So it's not a quick process. We bought it back in 21. We went through a process to select a development partner and picked Habitat in April of 22. We entered into a development agreement in September of that year, signed a ground lease the following year in March, got a building permit issued in June, and about 2 years later, we're ready for hopefully the completion of that project. So we'll provide 4 new units of home ownership housing. Are these all 4-bedroom, or there's 4 and 3s, right? Are there 4 and 3s there?
These are all 4.
These are all 4s. That's what I thought. Yeah, 60% AMI. So nice units. They look great.
What's the square footage? 2?
1,500 square feet, roughly speaking. Yeah.
So the big accomplishment this year was we did submit our application for certificate of housing, interim certificate of housing completion. Again, the timeline here, the project that put us over the hump is the one in the lower right-hand corner, 5545 Park Avenue. Came out really well. It's a nice unit. Talked to some of the people who live there, they love it. But that's the makeup of our moratorium application. About half were set aside developments, developed under 830G. And then the balance are split between the inclusionary zoning units, government assisted units, some that we've done as deed restricted both for ownership and rental. So we had to notify folks, the world, of our intent to file. We submitted right before the holidays. DOH certified it was complete right before the new year, and the comment period just ended. We expect that decision end of March. These are some of the other things we did. I made a few little changes there for Bob's analysis, so it's fit in the screen. But one of the things we did was try to create some other avenues for missing middle housing. That zoning change that allowed for a bonus unit if you dedicate 1 additional unit as affordable, which was approved. We looked at parking lots and whether they could be repurposed to support development, whether it's housing or something else, or just green space. It's just a waste of asphalt space. We did get a grant from the Fairfield County Center for Housing Opportunities. We hosted another ADU workshop, which is very well attended. Bob reprised his role as moderator, did a great job. We supported the zone change to allow off-site BMR units, which was approved. And we pursued the acquisition of 254 Greenfield Street, which the RTM stepped up and funded through ARPA dollars. It's great. This is our current plan, some of the key strategies in it. Looking to massively increase our set-aside requirements from 10 and 12 to something higher than that. The text amendment last night for the DRD overlay zone, they closed the public hearing. There were some comments from commissioners that were supportive. It was noted on the record that, if we're going to provide an alternative path to 830Gs, we need to provide something in between, and this is one way to do it, is to go back to the density that was allowed when we built some of these more popular condo developments. I think Emma was referring to earlier. I think we always want to look at where we can strengthen our design guidelines. Certainly, some of these projects we've seen come in, they're not the most aesthetically pleasing. Still looking at that missing middle housing as to how we can go about doing that. It's part of our effort with the Fairfield County Center for Housing Opportunities, and working with the Housing Authority to support their efforts.
And, you know, maybe those design guidelines, I think Jim brought this up in one of the discussions we had with the Housing Collective. Is we were talking about finding ways of modifying the zoning to enable more middle housing. And maybe where A zones and B zones can come together. And Jim suggested, you know, maybe part of the compromise would be design requirements, you know, so that the public would know what would be coming with any kind of liberalization of zoning.
Yep. I cover all the high points. Do you think there's other things we should cover? I'm sensitive to the fact that the RTM probably wants us to do it in like 15 minutes or less, but.
Well, last year they gave us some more time, but we had a really good discussion with in terms of the
A lot of
outlook.
questions, yeah.
So I think what we probably want to do is to avoid getting caught in the detail about somebody trying to analyze some of those early charts in terms of, you know, what that is, and really make sure we've got time for qualitative discussion with them about, you know.
Well,
with-
I'll send it to you. Feel free to mull it over and we
I
can.
think this is great. They won't see this until.
No. I don't like to give out my
Yeah, no,
slides
never.
beforehand. Because then they're all thumbing through it, you know, never paying attention to what you're saying. You have to repeat yourself.
Sure, I'll take a look. I think, but we had a really very good discussion with them.
We did.
And I think, you know, we could be able to identify some people that were really potential advocates that we can work with going forward, and hope we can do more of that on Tuesday night.
So when are you guys going to the RTM?
Next Tuesday.
We're 7:30, and I think we'll probably get on pretty early. Famous last words. I mean, we're number 5 or something.
We are sixth.
But it does, aren't the
Presentation.
things in front of us pretty perfunctory?
They are. They're appointments to boards, a couple grants, so they really shouldn't go that far. Famous last words. So, yeah. It'll be, I have to deliver a report for the Economic Development Commission too.
Oh, yes, absolutely. You're, and
It's the Mark Show.
it's a Mark show. It's got 3 items.
The Mark and Herb Show, and then Mark
And then
and
Mark.
Mark Show.
You're the warm-up.
Okay, well, that's all I had. I don't know, you know, I know you wanted to allow some time to talk about how we actually move forward with some of these
Yeah, it's
goals.
just really quickly, are there any other developments in the pipeline, Mark, that we haven't? talked about? I think there were a couple, so I wanted to give, and if you're not ready to speak to it, that's fine.
There's a lot of developments in
Is
the
this new,
pipeline.
is this new business
I think it's.
or is this continuation of old business?
So there are three projects currently under construction. At least 2. So, you know, I think Steve, you took pictures from Lacey Place on the Bronson Road development. They started to frame out the first floor above the podium.
How many floors is it gonna be?
91 units. I think it's 4 stories.
Because it stands out.
It will stand out from that side. You won't see it much from Bronson, but you'll see it definitely from the highway and from
And from the train.
Lacey Place.
It's striking if
Yeah,
you
for sure.
go into Lacey Place. Thank you for that, Steve. If you go into Lacey Place from Post Road, it's.
You can't miss it. Cannot miss it. It wasn't much to look at before. It was just a podium, but now they started framing it up. And then Beach Road is under construction, as you probably saw coming in.
Well, I meant on the other end. I mean, is there anything else that's going to emerge
Us?
for the Planning and Zoning Commission?
I think this is probably the universe of applications. I think what you see now, largely what you're gonna get. I don't know of anything else that's cooking out there. It's enough.
It is. It'll have to be cooked pretty quickly to get to get in, I think.
Yeah.
Get an application in, but good.
I mean, I take that back. There is one other project which is under our inclusionary zoning provision. We're affectionately referring to as trademark 3. So the trademark development on Commerce, Kings Highway, and then Alto. The same development entity acquired the Rio Bravo. They own
Oh, right, yes.
building next to it.
Yep.
So they're planning to do some complementary development
Yeah.
there. Smaller than the other two,
Yeah.
but still,
That'd be inclusionary.
it will be inclusionary.
Yeah.
And it'll be mixed use.
Hmm.
So that hasn't, what they are, they're not coming under 830G, they're coming in. They would like to do a concept review, assuming we have some time to do that. So,
And Rio Bravo would not stay.
well, they wouldn't be able to stay while they're
Right.
building it, but
Yeah.
Too bad.
They're gone.
I like them.
we can find them another location in town. There's always fine restaurant locations, so.
And the Mill Hill property, the church property, the Episcopal Church,
I think,
sold it anyway.
I think we've kind of put that on hold. But I do think it's, when we circulate is it you or Steve about the elderly housing, was the Wall Street Journal?
Today, today's Wall Street Journal.
So I can see that as a age restricted housing site.
Sure.
No.
Yeah, very, very residential in look and feel. Yeah.
So, I mean, I think.
That was the
we're just not
intention
there
for
yet.
Thorpe
Yeah.
Street, right?
Yeah, we're just not there.
Thorpe Street likewise.
Right.
Was gonna be age
So
restricted.
that was approved for 158 units of age restricted housing.
The gist of this article is that after languishing for years, senior housing is going to become more and more popular. But it's going to be amenity rich and for well-to-do people, and the people that are low to median income are going to be, crowded out. And that was the gist of the article. But it'll really take off and it'll be good for the developers.
The age group I thought was interesting. They were saying that when you hit 80 is when you decide you've got to move out of your house and go into some sort of assisted living or senior apartments. So.
80. I'm going before that. I'm ready to go now.
Well, that's an affordability issue. Those assisted living places aren't cheap.
I know.
Well, is there anything else that we need to cover?
But yeah, under old business,
Yeah.
I don't have anything. Is there anything else anybody else has under old business?
I don't know if it's old or new, but what's doing with the Fair Rent Commission?
What's up with it?
Yeah, what do they do?
What do we do? Well, when we get complaints from folks that believe their rent is unfair, we deal with those complaints. So it's very much driven by complaints. Thank you, Kevin.
Yeah.
We get more inquiries than turn into actual complaints, and we try to resolve the complaints informally through mediation with landlord before it requires a hearing.
Well, is there an affordability component?
No. It is not. It is strictly based on the threshold is the rent such that it's deemed to be harsh and unconscionable.
Thank you.
That's the finding they have to make. Thank you, Kevin.
Thank you, as always.
They have to, based on the evidence in the record, they have to determine that the rent being proposed is excessive to the point that it's harsh and unconscionable.
And so if you're in one of the new developments and it's not a affordable rent, and let's say it's 3,500 a month or 4,000 a month.
Yep.
And the new tenant, the developer wants to charge him 4,100 a month. That tenant can complain to the fair rent.
Good.
Yeah.
Good. Now, they have to, there has to be a reason for it, you know, sometimes costs go up, they pass that cost on to the tenants. You know, we also get complaints from the deed restricted units, and the landlord will say, but my rent complies with your limits.
Yeah.
Well, for a person on a fixed income, $200 increase in their rent is more than they can afford. And so, but they're like, but the landlord's like, but you said I can charge up to this. Well, that's true, but you also have to take into account if that rent is excessive to the point where somebody says it's unconscionable increase, then you're susceptible to it being adjusted.
So unlike in an 830G, the affordable units, they can question rent increases based on their income, not based on the landlord's costs.
They could, you know, it's typically after, you can't go in and say, well, that rent's too high, I'm filing a fair rent. You have to actually live there first. And then, so you live there and then, let's say the landlord's proposing a $200 increase, which has happened.
Mhm.
And, you have a 85-year-old woman lives on a fixed income in a apartment, says, you know, I can't afford $200 increase. And the landlord said, well, you said I can charge this. Well, that's true, but for this 85-year-old woman, that's too much. You can't pay it. What can you do? Well, that's not right. Okay, we're gonna go to a hearing. Go to a hearing and they adjust it.
And so there is an affordability component, but not defined within the confines of
Yeah,
affordability.
they have like 14 criteria by which they have to look at, you know, based on what's comparable.
I thought there was a state law about increases for elderly and disabled.
Seniors, yeah, it's a different standard. So seniors, it's.
85-year-old, but they would only be.
Correct. So we had to then say, you know, typically under fair rent, it's rent increase is such that it's harsh and unconscionable, but for an elderly person, it just has to be deemed unfair.
Right.
And so it's a lower threshold.
Right.
So we did, you know, a lot of these get settled before we get to a hearing.
There is legislation they're trying to put through now to do that across the board, not just for the elderly, to change that.
It's, I mean, I feel for the landlord too, because it's tough, you know, but we've had 3 or 4 go to hearing. And it's pretty much split down the middle. Two went, kind of one was a compromise that the tenant wasn't happy with and filed suit. Took us to housing court. One the landlord lost and another one, the tenant was, didn't get what.
So you're on the committee?
I'm not, I provide staff support to, just like this one.
Yeah.
Best solution might be to have lots of supply, so there's a very competitive market.
Yeah, we had a flurry of activity right after it was formed, and we still get calls. But, you know, a lot of people, when you tell them, when you file a complaint, they don't want to. Because housing is in tight supply, so they think, even though it's illegal to retaliate, they're still.
Yeah, you don't want to fight with your landlord.
They don't want to set that, set that up. So what we do is, the first thing we always tell people is, have you talked to your landlord or your property manager? And he said, I can't afford this. That's the first thing you do. And most people haven't. It's like, well, talk to them first and say, I can't do that, but I can do this. And a lot of times it works. Now, if it doesn't work, then you call us back and then we'll get involved. Sometimes we have to tell them that's the law. They can file a complaint. You're gonna have to come to a hearing, and they see the big picture and they say, okay, well, I won't take 150, $75. I'll do another 75 next year. So, But a couple people are stubborn. They're like, no, we're gonna fight it out. Okay. And it's, a group, they're not, we got one lawyer, but everyone else is kind of lay people. They hear the evidence and they make a decision right then and there. It's kind of an interesting process.
I wanted to mention that Bob came and spoke to our congregations organized for New Connecticut, about 10 people, and he gave his presentation on looking at town land in terms of possibilities. So it was very nice of him and very good presentation.
Awesome.
It was nice. It was a nice group.
Very interested in it.
Okay.
And so, the goals, the targets for the committee, where are we?
Where are we?
You'll see this is dated June of 2022, and that's because I'm using Steve's sheet. Do you remember this sheet, Steve? You put this together as kind of a synopsis. I think this is an easy way to just talk through it.
Well, we got that first one down. Almost.
You have one of these, Mark?
Thank you.
So everybody has one out there. So two overall goals. Moratorium. And probably more important is the second one, actually, in terms of the broad range of housing options and locations to address the growing needs that we have. So we're working both of these. And of course, big news is that with Mark's leadership, we're on our way to the moratorium. So a 4-year moratorium. And we've even got part of the way to moratorium number 2, which would be for 5 years. So that's on the pipeline. So great progress on that. And then we had 4 tier 1 strategies. We've done a lot of work on number 1. We don't have anything
To show for it, yeah.
we don't have anything wrapped up nice and tidy yet, but we're ready to move on that. And really, it's the POCD that's really sort of delayed, or I guess enabled our delay, because we just want to time that when it's the right time. But they're looking for an increase. I mean, they've been talking, about 15%. So they're looking for a substantial increase in terms of the affordability percentage. And where we are is, we've done some research. Mark and Tom Ivers have been doing some research, and we'll need to wrap that up as the POCD proceeds. So we're ready when they're ready for us. And then the second one, the DRD, which I think is probably worth talking about. Mark alluded to that last night, that came up in connection with the, I guess, the Stilson application. So we probably ought to talk about that a little bit. This has a history to it, and there is some resistance that seems to be coming from at least one of the commissioners to this. And I'm encouraged. It was encouraging that there was positive commentary by several of the commissioners last night toward this. I mean, DRD is actually sort of an overlay, that they can be overlaid on the existing zoning structures. So when Mark gets back, we're going to talk a little more about that. I think number 3, we're doing what we ought to be doing, supporting the housing authority. It probably would be worthwhile for us to have some additional dialogue, committee dialogue with Carol, and maybe we could get Carol on Zoom again, or even here in person to chat with us about what the latest developments are. But
we used to meet with some of the groups in Affordable Housing and Operation Hope and some of the others once a year or so. Communication, I think, is a good idea.
especially Operation Hope, we really haven't connected with them. I think, do they meet on the same night that we do Operation Hope?
They do, they have a board meeting typically, yeah.
So we'll have to figure a way around that, but we're just sort of moving through. We held DRD until you got back because of you brought up that situation. We were just talking a little bit about number 3, and I think we're think we're making good progress in one and three. And
Well, under three, I mean, when you look at the sub items, one is help them obtain land for future use. Second is update the inventory of town-owned land and properties. So we've done that. Land database.
Right.
That's under this.
Check that off.
that's a bullet under
Yeah.
number
Thank you,
three.
Bob.
Gonna change.
Yes.
Well, maybe it will change. It's done.
So I think so continued communication with Carol is probably good. We probably ought to try to at least zoom in with her periodically and probably find a way to connect directly with Operation Hope.
Well, I think once once their office location is settled, hopefully in the next couple months, maybe we can turn back to, and they'll have the massive capital campaign to meet the requirements to actually build it, but I think at least that part will be settled. They can focus on.
Been found a place?
Well, that's encouraging.
Well, we're moving ahead with the plan to lease Operation Hope, the town garage, former town garage on 488 Tunxus, which is too small for their overall needs, but they're under a contract to purchase the adjoining church property. 554 Tunxus Hill.
Including the church? Yeah.
Is not being used by the Episcopal Church anymore. They're under contract to purchase it. We're gonna have to provide a little bit of gap financing to bridge the purchase price. But that plan is being presented hopefully beginning next week, and then to other boards through February and March. Assuming everyone agrees, then at least that issue will be settled.
They're doing the church and the state or whatever that building is, that.
Correct.
So that gets on the parking they need.
Correct. And, the advantage of the church and the annex building that's there is it provides an interim location. If they have to move beforehand, they could occupy that and provide services out of there until the new building is constructed.
They're gonna provide a floor of affordable housing on top of the garage?
No housing. No housing, just offices, soup kitchen, food pantry. But there is a residence, there is an apartment in the church.
Yeah. there is.
So could be used, you never know.
That's one.
That's cool.
The church is historic.
Yeah.
And so that we had to disabuse the diocese that we could develop the property in some meaningful way.
I wonder how broadly you can define that, and can you get the affordable housing, or I'm sorry, the historic preservation tax credits when you do the build out?
Well, but we're not gonna try to use the church itself.
Yeah, I know, you need a good lawyer, someone who thinks creatively.
Why couldn't the Episcopal Church develop it into, say, affordable housing or whatever?
Well, their immediate need is to find a new home for their offices and their soup kitchen and food pantry. So that's what they're built. It's not a great site. You could do housing on it. It'd be somewhat limited. Obviously, you could do housing as evidenced by what was approved across the street. But, we also wanted to preserve the church itself.
Sure.
Were they happy with the outcome, where they could use it as a soup kitchen?
Their plan would be to build a new building that would house all those operations, but they could use the annex to the church has a kitchen in it and a social hall and classrooms, so they could use it for those purposes.
You're saying because it's historic, they can't tear down the church?
It would be difficult to tear down the church. The annex was built in the 60s. Now, the historic designation covers the entire property, but I think they could make the case that the annex doesn't really add to the the historic significance of the property.
I think it's 50 years old, you're historic.
Oh, sure.
Yeah. Excellent. Yeah.
No,
We're getting a little bit off the
we are.
Yeah,
point of
yeah.
what we're trying to do here is get through the goals, the goal status. I mean, if everybody wants to keep talking about it, we can, but I was really trying to get people out of here in a reasonable order. So, number two, Mark, we had actually, I guess, imagined some potential configurations for the DRD in the Affordable Housing Plan. And I guess,
This is one option, which is to revert back to the density that was permissible 40 years ago. And by which a lot of condo developments in town got built. It's a modest increase in density, but it works for developers. And it's more than what's currently allowed, but less than an 830G development. So I guess we're gonna have to wait and see how the planning and zoning commission reacts. They just had an application, restore that whole regimen. And if they approve it, then check that one off the box. Certainly, you know, I think you can approach this from a lot of different ways, but we have the inclusionary provision, so it'll apply anyway. The question is, you know, whether or not we want that up.
so if this is approved, this basically addresses our
Goal.
aspirations.
Right. That was the more commonsensical approach, which was, you know, go back to the way it was. That allowed for a modest increase, but meaningful increase in density that made things pencil out. And we, you know, I think that's the path of least resistance.
Right. Number four.
We don't really have anything on that.
Well, I mean, the for multifamily housing.
I mean, I think the thing is to have the benefit of having a moratorium, so you'd have some say in terms of design and locational guidelines for multifamily housing.
Is this something that we might want to take the time soon to begin formally addressing in connection with the state of the POCD or?
This, I'm not sure how we would go about it. I mean, we talked about having a kind of a design playbook, if you will. Sounds to me like that would be something that we'd probably bring in some outside expertise to help us develop something like that.
Well, has FHI done work to this end with the staff, you know?
I don't think on this specific aspect, no.
I mean, there was some discussion about that going back to that meeting we had in late 2022, but that'd be good if we. So 4 is to be done. 5, I mean, we've on a case-by-case basis.
Certainly have emphasized that.
Yeah.
40 years is so far in the future. Does it really make a big difference to push it out beyond 40?
It makes a huge difference, Tom, because what we don't want is a lot of units that are expiring at a given
the same time.
And you know, we're going to be facing that for some of our units well before 40 years from now. But with all the units that are being developed now, if we had expiration, we'd be putting a big burden on
Very suddenly.
future stakeholders. Yeah.
Yeah, that's it. And 40 years in the future is far enough that there's plenty of time to plan for stuff. And if it makes it easier to build and it might be worth going out there.
Well, there are always trade-offs.
Yeah,
There are
yeah,
always
yeah.
trade-offs in terms of trying to get things built. But,
Yeah.
I mean, when we have the opportunity, we've pushed it, we've encouraged it. We haven't mandated it so far, but we've encouraged it. And in situations where the town owns the land, of
Yeah.
course.
That's our prerogative. That's our prerogative. But in case where someone else owns the land, if it makes a difference between something not being built and being built, in my mind, it seems it's so far in the future that it's very hard to predict.
So it used to seem that way, but, so I worked in New York City 40 years ago.
Yeah,
And those units that were developed, they had the 40-year restriction. After 40 years, you lost the affordability and they became condominiums, expensive condominiums. And so you lose the affordable units and you can never get them back
yeah.
because the land now is fully developed.
That said, New York's got absolutely reactionary it's very hard to build anything in New York. So this isn't surprising.
It's not easy to build anything here now.
Yeah, fair point, fair
It's
point,
not
fair
easy to
point, yeah.
build anything. I
Yeah.
mean, these land prices have easily doubled in the last.
Yeah,
few
yeah,
years.
yeah, fair point.
So I really think it shouldn't be 40, it should be for perpetuity. Because they're getting something that they can't get under normal development code in town.
So we made some progress there. I think we keep doing what we're doing probably. Number 6,
Just one other thing, the language Mark now says something like, as long as the structure is there or
Yeah, for
something.
The life of the
life
development,
of the development.
not less than 40 years. We're pursuing build absolutely nothing anywhere near any.
Mark, number 6. So we can do this when we reform existing structures.
Yeah. The issue for us is, as Tom just noted, 40-year restriction is a long time. And it's really hard, Dean was here earlier, we've done a couple projects with a small investor type. We've helped using CDBG dollars to acquire multifamily units and then renovate them and convert them to deed restricted affordable housing for folks with housing choice vouchers, Section 8 vouchers. And it does pencil out very nicely from a cash flow standpoint, but we're providing maybe $30,000 per unit, so maybe $60,000 total. We're asking them to deed restrict the property for 40 years. Well, you can't deed restrict the property for 40 years, absolutely, because no one in their right mind would take that, because it's like 40 years is longer than I'm going to live, or the person I'm working with is going to live. So he doesn't want to do that. So what we do is we structure it like all of our multifamily rehab programs, a 40-year term, but it's a declining balance loan that converts to zero at the end of the term. So each year, 1/40th comes off the amount. But that, in the eyes of the state, is not a 40-year term.
Yeah.
It's a 1-year term. So, there's a point in which we're just gonna have to fight the good fight, and add to our affordable housing inventory more broadly and not worry about the moratorium.
And we're now in a position with the moratorium. We want to keep making progress, but we're now in a position to do a range of things. Not everything has to be 40-year. Deed restricted, but where possible,
Could be perpetuity.
we want to get it.
Well, new construction for sure, because you kind of have them.
Yeah.
Right where you want. I think the asset's gonna at least last 40 years anyway, so.
So at number 7.
This is the one that's proving most elusive. So I'm, you know, we still don't have a strong.
Well, we've talked about, we've done some things.
We've done a few things. Yep.
Presentation.
I think the bonus unit is certainly one way to do it. I'd like to do something on smaller than 15,000 square foot lots. We're
Yeah.
talking about a one that's a 12,000 square foot lot that really could support more than 2 units.
We talked there,
And we've done that analysis of residence B and Z zones where we know a lot of units are non-conforming.
right, and there still is discussion in the P O C D about zone modifications, you know, A to B, B to C, and so forth. There's also a provision to do a study of middle housing it's one sentence, but to me, maybe the most important one sentence in the plan to do a separate study of middle housing. So we've got that we want to try to champion. And I think we just keep working this as best as we can.
That number 7 doesn't have to be affordable.
Right, and we also now get a point or a quarter point for every middle housing unit that is developed. So every middle housing unit that's developed under a law, it was House Bill 5474, I think, last year. Not sure what it's called now. It came out of the legislature. Affords a quarter point for each housing unit. We can get the exact definition, but it's a real incentive to do that. So we have to keep working this though, as Mark said. And then staff capacity, we've taken some modest actions, Mark.
Yeah, Tom.
It's got Tom Ivers.
A part-time guy working there.
Yeah, so it's helped Mark and but he also has 2 more committees now he's got to deal with. Somebody took back with one hand after giving with the other.
One step forward,
That's
two
right.
steps forward. One step back.
That's right.
I like to be busy.
So Mark, 9 and 10.
I don't understand. Well, 9, I think we should periodically review our affordability plan and make modifications based on what we're seeing. But the current language does require developments to have an administrator approved by the town. I think what this probably captures is an idea that maybe they're working off a pre-vetted list of approved administrators that are capable of overseeing these affordability plans, as opposed to kind of technically they're approved by the Planning and Zoning Commission when they approve. the
I think
plan.
that's we envision when we
We have
we're
people
glad to
that
put this
maybe
together.
don't have a lot of experience in this regard.
Yeah.
Had a few issues. One we're in court on.
But you check these, and I mean, you don't see this as being a compelling.
You know, I think there are things that are administrative. I don't know that they necessarily need to trouble the commission or committee with. And I don't know that they produce units in and of themselves.
So I mean, our focus realistically ought to be where we can try to
Yeah, I think our
change the game,
focus should be on
produce more.
trying to find, opportunities to create a broader array of housing options for
All
folks.
targets are not created equal in significance.
And the guidelines for the Housing Trust Fund has kind of evolved. I didn't want to put too fine a point on it initially until we had some experience, and certainly don't want to just throw it out there and take all comers. If we talk to people and we don't think we think it's a viable project, it's can be funded through CDBG. We suggested filling out an application and bringing it before the committee, but we haven't gotten there yet.
And I think we're always that's leverage the dollars we have.
Right.
What do we really get per unit
Yeah.
for our investment?
Yeah, land is a key consideration, but the type of development we're doing that are smaller, less dense development, smaller developments. maybe it comes to a point where, you don't get as much bang for the buck there. If you're acquiring property and you're spending $100,000 per unit to buy the land, buy the dirt, is that the highest and best use for limited resources, so. But it could be, if that's what the committee is focused on, like, we want to build 3-family or 2-family units, might be the cost of doing business.
That's the type that we're going to have to weigh probably more and more as we go along. So we're halfway through the 5-year period. And so we thought it made sense just to look at where we are and just take stock. I personally think we're doing pretty well.
A little setback with I think if we had the POCD.
It's definitely been an inhibitor. It's been probably our disappointment, I think, fair to say. And unfortunately, not something that we actively can control.
I mean, then the next step, the next shoe that will drop would be us engaging with planning staff to amend the regs and revise and update the code. I mean, that's what we're anxious to dive into, that's where the devil is, right? That's gonna support all of our goals. Too. So,
So I do think we have made progress, so, on all these.
I think so.
One pragmatic way of increasing supply that sort of builds off what we've done so far, if you take the ADU limit, I think it's 40%, if make it 75%, maybe even 100%, that's essentially you can build the same house or 2/3 of the same house right next to you. With one simple stroke, one change of one number, you might be able to create a fair number of new units without jumping through hoops. And in a sort of low density.
ADU kind of appeals to a certain segment.
Correct, correct.
So I'm not sure that that might not be the key issue. And when we survey folks that participate in the workshop, the key issue seems to be financing.
But I think this is a good discussion for us to have with ADU pursuers.
Yeah, find out what's preventing you from moving ahead, moving forward. That's something that's of interest to you.
Because we might even want to pursue at some point some financing, grants that would at least help people to go part of the way in terms of building an ADU, because it's a very efficient way of, it's very sustainable.
Correct.
Of building housing, right? We're making use of the resources that are
Correct,
there.
that's already there. And I've seen a fair bit of this in California, and I've seen a number of use cases, but financing has not come up as a gating factor. And maybe it's this was in the Silicon Valley area, so maybe it is a area.
Well, out there, I mean, there's a tremendous emphasis on leveraging, the land that you have.
Yeah.
But we're getting to that point here too as well. So thanks for that. Okay, I mean, anything else on these? The only other thing we don't necessarily have to talk because it's almost 9, but we did want to talk about speakers for future meetings.
Yes.
And Mark and I have come up with a couple of ideas just through our work on that with the technical assistance project. And having somebody like Jean here tonight was really fortuitous, I think.
It was interesting.
And of course Kevin as well. And we met some people, in similar businesses with Jean through some of this work that we've been doing with other towns. And it's pretty interesting. I'm starting to get my arms around it. It's pretty complicated stuff. And in some cases, it does require leveraging funds from multiple sources to make this all work. But there are sources out there that can be used to leverage what we're starting with.
Yeah. Well, one might be, a builder or developers panel that we could put together and just ask them,
Great idea.
what they're seeing and what's preventing them from addressing the lower tier of the market. Is it simply that, chasing where the money is, obviously, but are there other things that we could tackle that would make it easier to build housing supply for folks at lower incomes?
It's a reverse of the ADU workshop, the other side of the coin.
So, been thinking about that.
Yeah, let's do it. And then in the meantime, if we want, we could probably arrange, you know, relatively brief Zooms with some of these
Right.
sources of
Some of the other-
financing.
We've,
during our meeting.
through the Fairfield County Center for Housing Opportunity, we've met with a number of other communities. And, you know, some of them are known to you. We've had, talked to folks at Stanford before, but it's always helpful to hear what others are doing. Maybe get some lessons from that, things that we could apply here. And certainly the fact that we have things on Zoom, they don't have to like travel from Glastonbury or wherever to get here. So if you have ideas of groups or speaker ideas, just let me know.
Good idea.
I can give you two now. Architects would be good, especially with someone like, he escapes me, but he designs small houses or small structures.
Duo Dickinson,
Duo, yes, he does 2 4-unit structures, that kind of stuff.
your favorite guy.
And he's very good. And on the financing side, the New York City Community Preservation Corporation, I think they're very good. They operate mostly in New York, but they do a little bit in Connecticut. And they've been around for 70 years. And they're the first and I think the best financing arm for affordable housing.
Well, if you want to make a connection.
I could easily make that connection, yeah. And Dual too.
There's some people at the Yale School of Architecture too, who are doing really interesting
Yeah.
stuff.
Okay, anything else for tonight?
Yep, I got 2 things. So this is the action plan from the 2014. And you might want to take another look at this. There were 11 items. One of the items was getting the second moratorium, so I'm not considering that. So there's 10 items. And I think we've completed all 10.
Well, there's some that are ongoing.
And one of that is ongoing is tax abatement. And you were working with a potential developer in the Black Rock train station area?
We did not come to terms, and basically I said the rationale for it at the time was kind of, it needs to be a public purpose as to why you're providing assistance, right? And in that case, the idea was we're trying to incentivize them to go beyond what is the bare, the floor, the requirement, to do more and to offset the cost, but towards accumulating enough points for a second moratorium. The problem now, as I explained to him, is we have so many projects in the pipeline that even if a small fraction of those gets built, I have enough points for the second moratorium. So it's kind of hard for me to justify laying out dollars to incentivize a project to do points that I'm already going to get some other way without the benefit of public dollars.
Sure.
So,
But you're going to provide,
but I think the framework is sound. I think it's something we should think about in the future because, moratoriums are fleeting. They don't last forever.
and you're increasing supply of housing, which we need them with or without the moratorium.
That's right.
Yeah, I agree. I wasn't relishing making the case for, skeptical boards. And I, may not have been the right one because I sensed that he wasn't as motivated. So it was like, yeah, if you really make it worth my while. So it seemed like we were having to go a little bit beyond what I was comfortable with in terms of the offer.
Okay.
But I think, again, the concept is a good one. We should consider that as a tool in our toolkit. We have extended tax abatements to other nonprofit organizations to provide affordable housing. But there's no reason that we can't do it for profit if the end result is to provide more affordable units or deeper affordability.
And, you know, there's a lot more that we could be doing just within this, you know, second goal. In terms of looking for housing options for people, whether it's affordable or not. So there's plenty of work.
What would be nice, I think, in that regard is not to do it as a one-off, but rather to create a program that works that people can then apply to. And then, you know, it's kind of.
It's systematic.
Right. So other communities have done that, Boston, other larger cities. We could do the same. I'm just trying to find where the sweet spot is in terms of not putting out too much in the way of subsidy to get the return that you're looking for. So it's always a balancing act.
Okay, anything else for this evening? Is there a motion for adjournment? If not, there's a motion. Is there a second? All in favor?
Aye.
Yay.
Thanks, everyone.
Is it awesome?